Hey guys, Chris Grant here, and today we're going to talk to former Amazon employee Chris McCabe, and we're going to dive deep into things like IP violations and how to effectively and efficiently combat them. All right, let's dive in. Hey everybody, Chris Grant here, and today I have a very special guest, Chris McCabe of ecommercechris.com, and we're going to be talking about intellectual property and IP violations, specifically how to effectively and efficiently overcome them as long as you're in the right, of course. So, Chris,
Yeah,
thank you for being with me today. I really
sure.
appreciate it. And would you mind giving us a little bit of your background, what got you started, and I guess what got you into this business altogether?
Right. So I worked at Amazon in seller performance and on the notice queues and policy enforcement teams for several years, I guess about 6 years. I left to work independently, work for myself, but also help sellers on the same material from the other side. So help them understand my former teams and why they communicate or fail to communicate sometimes, communicate the way they do, help them understand internal teams, how their information is received and why they get certain messaging back, what to send them to begin with, and also how to diagnose and troubleshoot those types of situations where you might lose a listing or even, unfortunately, some people are losing their entire accounts over infringement issues like this, like what we're talking about today. So I've been doing this about 4 years, and I was at Amazon for about 6, so about 10 years total.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me ask you this before we kind of dig into the meat of IP violations.
Yeah.
Does it, being on this side, does it frustrate you how Amazon communicates, or is there a good reason behind the way they communicate?
When it comes to infringement issues, is a really good reason. They want to be sparse in their communication because they don't want to admit to anything in writing that they don't have to, or take sides even necessarily if they don't have to. So that's deliberate. Language has to be approved by Amazon legal and policy teams before it even gets put into generic messaging that sellers see. And that's a process as well. I used to write some of the messaging myself. I would get the edited version back after submitting it. So notice language, of course, is deliberately vague because Amazon doesn't want to be caught in the middle between brands and, I guess we're mostly talking about resellers today, right? So
Yes, mostly resellers today.
brands and resellers, Amazon doesn't want to officiate those disputes. So they're deliberately sparse in those communications because really the major interaction needs to happen between you, the reseller, and whoever submitted, the rights owner, whoever submitted the complaint against you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that's good to know. I think most people, well, hopefully most people know that, but at least that should alleviate some frustration because, and I'm sure you spend a little bit of time in the Facebook groups,
Yep.
But when these things do happen, that is one of the things people get irritated with is the kind of communication they get.
Yeah. I've got my own Facebook. I've got different Facebook groups actually, which we can talk about later. But my main Facebook group is Amazon Seller First Class. We encourage people to post if they're willing to some of the messaging right there on the page so that we can dissect it. I weigh in on it. My associate Liam McHugh reads them as well. And then other sellers who are, baffled by some of the messaging, but some of them have experienced, they've gone through whatever that person that day has it posted and they've experienced it and they have a positive success story to come out of it. So the messaging doesn't have to be, opaque and obscure and inscrutable. We can actually help people interpret, some of what's going on in Amazon's collective head before they send that stuff out to you. So
yeah, that's important. It seems like we kind of need to read their mind so that we communicate properly on what they want.
Which is somewhat by design, I hate to say it. So I don't know if that's going to improve or change anytime soon. They want things to be deliberately vague because they reserve the right to interpret things their way at the appropriate time.
Okay. Yeah. And really, the onus is on us as sellers. It is Amazon's playground and it is a privilege to sell there.
Right.
So I certainly understand why they would want to be vague, because we do need to prove that if we did make a mistake that we're willing to overcome it.
Right. Definitely. They want to hear that you understand the nature of the infringement offense, that you've reached out to the rights owner to try to resolve the infringement offense. Where things tend to break down is when you don't hear, as a seller, you don't hear back from the rights owner and you're not sure what to do. And we can definitely get into that. It's a less than ideal situation. The best scenario is you get the retraction from the brand who understands that you made a mistake, who accepts that you made a mistake, but hopefully the brand or the compliance agent, attorney, whatever it might be. Hopefully that party understands that this is a normal part of e-commerce selling in this day and age. And these mistakes do sometimes happen, and they're understanding about it, and they help you work it out so that it doesn't negatively impact your entire Amazon account, especially when it's only like one listing or you've only sold a few of them. I mean, you're not exactly out there creating tremendous intellectual property damage to that party. And hopefully they understand that in the scope of their response.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's dive into, I guess, what happens when you receive an IP complaint, and then how you feel it. And of course, we are talking arbitrage mostly, and
right.
I get it does happen occasionally with wholesale.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You know, but let's talk about what happens when you get a complaint and how you should effectively respond to the brand owner and then to Amazon if necessary.
Right. So keep an open mind. A lot of people respond reflexively, and they go straight into defense mode and denial. And there's no reason I can't sell this. I'm not doing anything illegal. There's a lot of misconceptions, misunderstandings. This isn't necessarily Amazon taking the brand side against you. Amazon has to take certain actions when they receive properly configured, properly filled out rights ownership reports. So they're kind of officiating a dispute in a sense, but not really, not in a legal sense. They leave it up to you to go to that party. If you're not sure, if you're not an intellectual property or trademark trained attorney yourself, you probably don't want to make legal judgments on your own. You want to go to someone professional, somebody who understands online and e-commerce sales versus rights ownership and intellectual property or trademark type complaints. If you don't have an attorney, I can refer one or two to you that I trust. I know there's a lot out there that promise they know exactly what's going on in every situation. I've seen it be hit or miss, but be that as it may, you want to find out the nature of that complaint. And sometimes you can do it simply by contacting the rights owner, asking them what's the nature of this intellectual property complaint. That can mean multiple things. And also, what can I do to resolve this problem with you? You don't necessarily have to start that conversation by volunteering, I'll never sell this brand again. I'm really sorry. I'm 100% guilty. Go easy on me. But they might come back to you and say, we don't want you selling this on Amazon. Probably a battle you can't win if they don't want you selling their products. You could try to fight with them over your legal rights to resell items online that you buy through legitimate channels. Probably not worth your while in most cases. So you're trying to just get information from them. Hopefully they respond, and then use that information to move you to the second phase of this, which is, am I simply pulling the inventory out and deleting the listing? That doesn't really solve the fact that I got the warning in the first place from Amazon's perspective, but it does, in a sense, solve your dispute with that party. You could always, if they simply refuse to retract it, that's your ideal, right? They reach out to Amazon and they retract the notice, and they say they've resolved it with you, and you can either sell it in the future, or they've resolved it with you because you won't sell it in the future. Short of that, if they won't respond, they say, I'm sorry, legitimate complaint, we refuse to retract it. You can at least reach out to that brand owner and say, well, we've taken steps on our end. We've pulled the inventory off Amazon. We've deleted the listing, and we won't be selling this brand again. So reduces the likelihood that they'll be reporting you a second time or coming after you again in the future on Amazon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I have seen some people, and I want to get your opinion on this because I know you deal with this on a regular basis or semi-regular basis.
Yeah.
I have seen some people advise that if they don't respond, you should reach out again and say, listen, I'm not doing anything wrong. And if this continues, I may file a counter DMCA notice.
I've seen, that's a bit more of a legal question, and I can't really offer legal advice, but
absolutely.
But I've seen people misusing the DMCA. The short answer is there's a lot of confusion and misconceptions around what it is in and of itself, and then beyond that, if you can use it in a situation like that. And just like there's a lot of confusion over, are you offending a copyright if you jump on someone else's listings, right? And you didn't create the listings, but you've jumped on a listing that uses that image, because the rights owner will name all of you, everybody listing that. And of course, I have my own answer on that question. Some people say, no, it's just the person who created the listing. I tend to think you're getting yourself into hot water just by jumping on listings where you have no idea if the image is copyrighted or not. But risk assessment's my job, risk management. And I tell people, that pay me every first of the month, that they need to play it safe when it comes to stuff like this. I don't recommend willy-nilly, I'm going to come after you if you come after me type approach to this, unless you've got an attorney who's backing you on it with a letter that they've written, which is, again, there's good attorneys and bad attorneys in this space, a letter that actually makes sense. And wasn't written sloppily or with lots of typos or grammatical errors. And I've seen all sorts of interesting stuff from attorneys lately. Obviously, they just had some low-level paralegal banging something out. And the rights owner was not impressed at all with this correspondence. In fact, it had the opposite effect, right? Instead of maybe letting you off the hook, they've decided to jump on you with both feet because they think you're making life hard for them by sending them letters from an attorney of a combative nature, let's say. So be very careful with that and get proper legal advice before you prepare a counter notice like that.
Absolutely. So now that we've talked about dealing with the brand owner, if they're just not responding, which I know that happens. I know there are a few brand management companies that are fairly known for just not responding after they file these. What's the best way to approach Amazon to hopefully have this removed from your record?
Right. So it won't be removed entirely from your record. Annotations are annotations and they stay. The best you can do is resolve the complaint. If they're not responding, then the likelihood of getting a retraction at any point is dim. So you won't have that ideal scenario. I probably should point out, make sure you do some research to make sure that you got hit with a rights owner infringement from the actual brand or brand owner, because some people are just faking that it's from the brand owner. And in that case, you can file a notice dispute with Amazon and say, this never came from the brand. So confirm whether or not it's a legitimate notice claim of infringement. Don't assume Amazon's done that for you, because lots of times they're not sure, they don't know, they take what they're given and they send it over to you. So that's an important distinction to make, because sometimes you're not hearing from them because they're not the brand and they're not legitimate. And of course, you're not going to hear from them if they're just faking you out. Right. So that's kind of your first step, again, whether on your own or with an attorney's help. Determine whether or not that actually came from the brand. Lots of people like to simulate that they are the brand and they're not.
Are there any tricks to figure that out, or do you just need to do some internet research, digging?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to figure it out from anecdotal limited experience on my side is reaching out to the brand's legal departments and saying, hey, I got a notice from Amazon. People approach it different ways. They might say, oh, I want to make sure this isn't like a phishing email or a spam email that isn't from Amazon at all. I want to make sure that you actually sent this there. Or you could simply say, listen, we bought these items legitimately. We were selling them on Amazon because we saw that they were already being sold on Amazon. Not necessarily an excuse, but still it's an entry into the conversation of, by the way, did you send this thing to Amazon? Because that's important information to have. You don't want to spend necessarily funds on an attorney or waste your time with a fake complaint if you can write to notice dispute yourself and say, this didn't even come from the brand. I checked with the brand. I've got an email from them. Hopefully you can get like a letter or something more official that says, we didn't send this. And by the way, the brand should actually care if somebody pretends to act in their name and send notice infringements to Amazon. The brand should be their attorney should be very interested in that experience. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. And in terms of resolving it, it's tough because you're really reduced to getting your account annotated. If you don't have the retraction, it's not coming. You're never going to hear from the legitimate party. I recommend, what I work with my clients on is pull something together, some messaging, maybe even a short bulleted list of all the steps you're going to take. It's like plan of action style language on how you'll avoid future complaints similar to this one. So the first step is saying we've pulled the inventory, deleted the listings. That's obvious. You have to tell them that you've done that. If you've got other listings of the same brand, of course, you have to kind of make an assessment. Am I going to pull those as well? Because that could be up next week. Mm-hmm. Will I be able to defend that one any more easily than this one? Probably not. So you might have hit a dead end for selling that brand anymore, and you want to, delete those listings as well, but also give Amazon policy people and notice teams some indication that you're actively preventing future notices, not just from this rights owner, but from all rights owners. That's really what Amazon wants to hear, and that's what you want to get annotated on your account.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And this should go without saying, but if you write a plan of action style letter to Amazon, you should make sure that you have completed the steps you say you're going to before shooting it off.
Right. Big problem these days is people making promises they can't keep. And I'm not saying Amazon has any extra free time. They have no time really to go through and call you in 2 weeks and see if you're actually executing your POA. They won't even bother with that. It'll be evident on your account if you're not following through. And I say this after, I've worked with a lot of people suspended for rights owner infringements, helped them compose the plan of action. Some of them get in rights owner trouble again in the future, and I suspect it's because they weren't following the steps to make sure that they would not attract negative attention from brands, because when it comes down to it, especially a big, well-known brand, you can't expect Amazon to have your back when brands are complaining to them that you don't have the legal right to sell their products on the site, and they're not going to really expect you to sue them or fight it out to prove that, yes, they shouldn't be submitting these forms against you. I mean, Amazon will execute the form as long as it's completed. So, in terms of arbitrage sales, be careful of the kind of mental list of danger brands out there in terms of some brands don't want you selling their products on Amazon. They don't care if you bought them in an outlet store. They might know that you've got a legitimate receipt behind your purchases. They might know that you bought from one of their stores. Maybe you could send them a store locator and tell them exactly where you bought it. You might even have the name of a manager there. But it gets deeper than that very quickly, because Amazon won't necessarily take that receipt unless you're accused of counterfeit and you give them a receipt and they accept it and they clear you. Amazon can do that unilaterally on their own. They won't necessarily call the brand and say, hey, by the way, we're going to take over this rights owner problem for you and make sure that we chase off all these sellers. I mean, they don't do that. They let the brand decide who they want to sell those products at what price. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So let me ask this, and then I want to dive into some of the questions that I collected from the audience. Mm-hmm. If you properly deal with Amazon and you have your account notated, are your chances better if this does happen in the future of not getting suspended? Are you protected in any way, or is it just you have to see what happens?
It's better than nothing to have the annotations. Of course, if you keep accruing rights ownership warnings and notifications, you will eventually get suspended. This applies to lots of sellers. I've worked with some really large accounts that have multiple infringements per month. So there's no hard count set number because obviously it's algorithmic, just like anything else Amazon's doing. But ultimately, every time these come in, you're increasing Amazon's liability because there's an extra chance that they might miss one. They might not act on something they should have. An investigator might resolve the contact and take no action. I mean, that ups Amazon's liability just from making a mistake. So you're increasing Amazon's liability the more of these that you attract. And ultimately, they don't want that liability. If they think you're going to continue indefinitely like this, they'll take the account away.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's good to know. All right, let's jump into some questions.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of these are going to be arbitrage based, and I don't know your opinion on the arbitrage model.
I just think it's a risky model because reselling isn't what it used to be on Amazon. Retail receipts are still in theory accepted. A lot of times they're rejected simply because product quality teams want specific verifiable information about suppliers. And if you only have a retail receipt, you don't necessarily have a sales manager name and number and email address that they can reach out to. And you do have something like a store locator. You don't really have a website to a wholesaler that they can just check out and see how professional they are and how established they are in the field. So it's really more about, it's not so much my personal feelings. I think anyone should be able to sell anything legitimately sourced. It's more about Amazon really grinding down people that don't have the documentation that meets their standards or the verifiable supplier information that they think every seller should have. So it's kind of up to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So let's dig into some of these questions.
Yeah.
And this one I found interesting and may even make you cringe a little bit. But when you source from Amazon overstock via auction, and it is the same stock, How do you defend an IP claim if you cannot produce an itemized invoice?
So is it Amazon from retail or from like liquidation? Like Amazon, has liquidations they do from lost and found FBA inventory that's third party. It's right.
The way that I read that is
Okay.
it would be directly from Amazon lost inventory.
From Amazon's inventory, retail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've seen people successfully defend these when they bought specifically from Amazon, but not every time.
Okay.
So that's a bit of admittedly, there should be a clear answer to that. It's a gray area, unfortunately. Some people, it's hit or miss. Some people get away with that. Some people don't. But you can't really turn the tables and say, well, Amazon should have vetted this product for intellectual property. They're the ones who sold it. You can't really say that about a wholesaler. You can't say, well, my wholesaler sold me this and said I could sell it on Amazon. So it's a bit of a gray area simply because you're buying directly from the company. If you buy from a wholesaler and that wholesaler has no idea whether or not the brand is going to come after you, then that's a major problem because they should not be handing you a ticking bomb. And it's not done on purpose. I understand it's unintentional, but it doesn't matter. The damage could be created simply because they bought from the brand and they didn't check with the brand or care if rights ownership issues would come up later on down the line for whoever they sold the products to. Amazon doesn't really think about it that way, and they don't have to because they're themselves. So yeah,
and it's their rule. And I'm wondering, with as large as they are, does the team that handles IP claims even know that Amazon is selling lost inventory?
They don't.
Yeah.
There's a good answer to that question. They don't even think about it. They might think about it, but they don't really care.
Yeah.
In the future, let's hope for a future where you can kind of have a whitelist of, I bought this from you, and you're participating in your own transparency program or your own exclusives, or you have your own vetting process to make sure that sellers who buy from the company don't offend anyone's legal, rights ownership. But that's not the way things work right now. It tends to be knee jerk. Hey, show us the invoices. Hey, show us legitimate supply chain. And you don't necessarily have that if you buy from Amazon. I know it's counterintuitive in a sense, but a lot of the policy investigators, it comes down to what can you show us? If you can either, it's binary. You can either show us the things we need or you can't. And then you get stuck kind of chasing your tail in that circle saying, no, I bought it from Amazon. Okay, but we need these documents. And it's not the best way to kind of set up your business model, unfortunately.
Right. This next question kind of goes back to something we talked about already. So I'm going to read the whole thing here.
Yep.
When reaching out to the manufacturer and or the brand police via email while addressing the IP claim with proof of the product being bona fide, and they balk or never reply, what's the next best course of action if Amazon sends you the same canned email as a reply after alerting them?
Right.
Seems like they're taking a laissez-faire attitude, and I want to get the matter solved.
So I think what they're talking about is the message that says, don't talk to me, talk to the rights owner, right? That's where a lot of people get stuck. They either try to talk to Amazon first or they try to talk to the rights owner. They get nowhere. They either get a response that says no thanks, or they get no response. You're not going to get a lot of traction going to Amazon unless you're disputing the notice. And I discourage anyone from disputing it just because they feel desperate or anxious about the situation. Only do it if you have proper legal grounds for disputing the legitimacy or validity of that notice. Don't keep going to Amazon saying, why are you sending me canned answers? They send you canned answers because that's what they're supposed to do. They cannot officiate or mediate a legal dispute, which is what this is between these two parties. They don't have independent legal services that they contract out and offer to sellers and brands. Maybe in the future there'll be something else, right? Years away. But that's not Amazon Legal's role, and it's not Amazon's job to assume the liability. Amazon's liable if the brand sends them the notice claim and they do nothing about it. Then they could be sued for damages by the brand. I mean, there's degrees of this. This isn't so straightforward, but essentially that's what it is.
Okay.
And if you prove to Amazon that you were, like if you're accused of counterfeit, and you prove to them that you weren't selling counterfeit, or that there was an abusive claim submitted by an agent of the brand, maybe even the brand themselves, if they were intentionally making false allegations just because they want to get you off a listing for their own reasons, then there's something there that you could sue Amazon for if they refuse to acknowledge it. Nobody really pursues that course of action. But their interest on both sides, not just the brand, also on your side, is to avoid litigation from you and avoid litigation from the brand. Most of the time they want this to be resolved off-site, right? They're the platform, they're the marketplace. They have to be involved on some level. They want to minimize their involvement. So don't keep emailing, long story short, don't keep emailing them. Why won't you take my part? I'm legally selling this. A lot of people do this. I see these emails. People send them to me before they send them to Amazon. And they say, I got a receipt. It's from the store that the brand owns. It's from a wholesaler that's an authorized distributor of this brand. I get all of that. Amazon doesn't care because they don't need to care. They don't need to intervene unless they're compelled, by a subpoena, by a court order. Some sort of injunction gets filed. I mean, those are extreme outlier cases. Mm-hmm. I'm not as familiar with the entire, court history around infringements that some attorneys might be, but beyond that, I know how it plays out in real life, which is if you can't get satisfaction from the brand or their attorney, and you have no basis for litigation against them, or you're not interested in litigation, even with a basis against them, you have to drop it. It's up to you to pull the inventory, delete the listing, ask Amazon to annotate your account. If you really think a second attempt with the brand might result in a retraction, then go for it, right? Sometimes the second attempt is written by an attorney who's competent and who writes a decent letter, and it's on their law firm letterhead, and you'll get a different answer back. I've seen this countless times. Mm-hmm. So that can be worth your time and your dollar. You can't necessarily consider it guaranteed simply because an attorney sends it in. There are attorney letters that also get ignored as much as your letter was ignored.
Sure.
But it might be worth, it depends on your own risk assessment of the situation. It might be worth it to you to pull out all the stops. So.
Perfect.
I know these are long-winded answers.
That's okay.
It's an intricate topic, and I deal with it on an hourly basis. So.
I have one lady who says she got an email directly to her email address from someone claiming to be the lawyer for a company of a product that she sells on Amazon.
Yeah.
They said to read the attached letter, supposedly from a lawyer.
Right.
The letter threatens me to cease and desist selling that brand, and so on. Is there anything that she should do? Should she even respond, since it's outside of the Amazon ecosphere?
It's not the same thing as getting a notice claim of infringement, because if it's legitimate, they probably should have gone through the notice claim process, and it's somewhat suspicious that they haven't. Now, maybe some people are doing it because they want to handle things a different way, and they want to keep Amazon out of it for their own reasons, whatever they might be. But at that point, you need to get some legal advice, and it's not simple legal advice, but simply contact an attorney and say, look, I need somebody to tell me if I'm really infringing here or not. If I'm not, I can ignore this. Mm-hmm. In most cases. If I am, I hate to use the word ignore, because you might have another threat coming from the same law firm or the same party in the future that you need to be prepared for. But for the moment, you might not have to take any action vis-a-vis your Amazon listings or account if it's a baseless threat, right? If they either don't intend to follow through on it, or they're just trying to scare people. I mean, I've heard some people on Facebook threads and different groups saying, look, I just send these cease and desists out, and 40% of them, people just drop off the listing. They don't want to deal with it, or they're afraid. I don't even know if anyone's thought about whether or not they're legitimate. So you want to look into it, right? You don't want to just, go down like a ton of bricks every time you get a strange email about this.
Right.
And then there's a second layer to this too. I mean, there are also law firms who are out there trying to, collect additional fees for their work by sending out these cease and desists where it's not really necessary, it's not needed. They're offering brand protection services to brands, and they say, hey, we'll write up a great cease and desist for you, and you don't even have to involve Amazon. You can send it straight to the storefronts, right? So there are some attorneys out there, in kind of an unsavory way, pitching their services in ways that, let's face it, Amazon wouldn't really like, because Amazon doesn't want to be caught in the middle of in any future notice claim that involves a lot of people. I mean, first of all, Amazon sees a lot of sellers dropping off listings that maybe don't need to, which could hurt their revenue and their potential commissions. Nobody ever talks about that angle. But beyond that, are there attorneys out there sending cease and desist on behalf of clients without ever discussing with those brands the potential downside of those kinds of aggressive tactics, right? What if a lot of the sellers, I only say this because I'm aware of a case that is related to this. What if those sellers are established high revenue sellers who have account managers who don't like being attacked or threatened like this, who go to VPs of marketplace and complain to them about this, and they complain about the particular law firm? I know this is going on. I know people who have done this, and they've said, I keep getting letters from this law firm that's out pitching their services to these different brands. I don't think the brands know that this could have an adverse effect on their relationship with Amazon down the road. If it's an overly aggressive tactic, or if it's from a law firm that Amazon doesn't particularly like, I don't think the brands ever consider that.
Yeah.
But then when these sellers complain some of these sellers have been on Amazon 10 or 12 years. They've got inside contacts, sometimes even on the notice teams, which I haven't really talked about this much. Today's kind of the first time I've gotten into some of these details. But if they have friends or contacts on these notice teams, they'll say, by the way, here's the attorney it came from. Here's the brand that they represent. I need some relief. You're probably getting lots of notice forms that you don't want to see coming in anymore. You might be flooded with them. This might be useful information to you. Maybe you should look into this law firm. Maybe you should look into where this brand is trying to control exclusive distribution of their products on Amazon. Do you see what I'm saying? You don't hear about this in the forums of the Facebook groups.
Right.
What's going on behind the scenes. And I care about it because it impacts clients of mine who may have, searched for an attorney and just found what they found. And they may have hired somebody to help them with some other unrelated legal issue without knowing that law firm is in hot water with Amazon already. So could hurt them in the future as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
First podcast mention that I've made of that, by the way. So.
Oh, nice.
Pearls of wisdom.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And I'm sure it's not going to be played out publicly, unfortunately, so that, so that sellers can see what happens.
Too many details to it. I have actually mentioned this too. I mean, I get requests for interviews and things like that. I've mentioned this before in a couple of places, not necessarily seller forums or podcasts, but to people who I don't know if they want to dig deep enough to really get to the bottom of that sort of, scenario involving too many players, lawyers, sellers, Amazon, brands. There's too many players in the game, and it would take them an eternity to sort it out. So they kind of back away from the subject. But this is going on behind the scenes. A lot of people just don't really know about it.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So there you go. There's an answer.
Now, we kind of touched on this already, but someone is asking. They've had a couple of IP claims, and they're just wondering if Amazon is ever going to straighten it out. Is it ever going to be more of a straight process? And I know you've already said, well, Amazon doesn't really have to,
right.
So it very well may not.
I think it would take a seismic event for things to change to the point where Amazon's legal teams are weighing in terms of how they process notice forms. I mean, I was processing them similar to how it's done today, maybe 10 years ago, 9 years ago. So it hasn't really changed much because they don't want, it's not just liability. They don't really want additional administrative costs. No one's saying Amazon couldn't hire a couple thousand paralegals of their own to go over some of this stuff and maybe craft and a different process and handle the queues differently. But policy investigators handle the claims, not trained paralegals, not people who went to law school. I never went to law school. So I don't think it's going to change anytime soon because Amazon doesn't have the incentive to change it, and they don't want to increase their liability by sticking their necks out by offering more help than they need to. But that being said, there could be it could change. There could be a lawsuit that comes out of this. Somebody might sue a brand. Somebody might sue an attorney, sending them unlawful cease and desists, or let's say unsubstantiated cease and desists. There's already some background of people who are submitting notice claims saying, hey, you didn't have the right warranties, so you shouldn't be selling this. That's an intellectual property violation.
Mm-hmm.
Or you didn't safety test the products the way the brand does, so you shouldn't be selling this legally on Amazon. That's a violation. I mean, some of this is kind of murky legal territory.
Yeah.
There's already been some activity around lawsuits in terms of people defending themselves against brands who allege that they sold counterfeit products, right? Because, if you buy some shoes from Nike at a Nike outlet, you're probably not selling counterfeit products of Nike.
Right.
If you buy from an authorized, Samsung has 5 or 6 authorized distributors listed on their website. How many times have I worked with sellers selling Samsung who are only buying from those authorized distributors listed on the website who are accused of inauthentic or counterfeit? Not by Samsung, but by brands. By sellers, other sellers.
Oh, jeez.
Or maybe sometimes, not Samsung, but sometimes it's the brand buys from you and alleges counterfeit, and you are buying from one of their legitimate distributors, which is kind of crazy when you think about it.
Yeah.
Especially if that distributor is on your website and you're going around the distributor I legitimately sourced the product from, and you're buying directly from me, from my storefront, because you've got a compliance agent or legal teams inside your company in corporate headquarters doing all this stuff that your distributor doesn't know about, which kind of undermines your relationship with that distributor in essence, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
They're kind of calling their own authorized distributor a fraud. Right? How else can you read that situation?
It really is.
If I were an authorized distributor, it has actually, I can think of some Samsung cases. If I'm an authorized distributor of Samsung and I'm selling my legitimately sourced products from Samsung to you, and they're accusing you of counterfeit sales, which is essentially a fraud, then they're calling me fraudulent as well.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And
that's how crazy it gets.
That it could seriously damage a distributor's business if they do that to enough sellers.
Yeah.
If the sellers are making up the majority of that distributor's revenue.
Yeah. And also, there's evidence, anecdotal, but there's evidence that Amazon investigators, if they, might be kind of unofficially blacklisting certain wholesalers if they associate several of the storefronts or the accounts that buy from those wholesalers with counterfeit complaints. And then they keep seeing the same invoices over and over, right, from the same company that's supplying all these accounts. Then you're kind of negatively associated with would-be counterfeit sales.
Right.
And you might be on an unofficial form of blacklist as a distributor, and that's all because of what? The brands buying from those stores.
Right.
And saying they're fake. You could have, I would think, to be the basis of a lawsuit there somewhere.
Yeah,
if you're actually willing to take the brand that you're buying from the court, which most distributors won't do that.
Right.
That's how crazy it starts to get. It negatively reflects on the distributor in ways that I think dozens, hundreds, thousands of wholesalers may not even fully understand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in the long run, if it keeps happening like that, it will affect the marketplace as a whole.
Yeah.
Honestly, one of the reasons that Amazon does so well is because there are sellers who are meeting the demand, and if then they're driving prices down, which was what Amazon wants.
Selection.
Yep. And Amazon is so large now that they make a real impact on a lot of people and on a huge portion of the marketplace.
Right.
And if things keep going that way, I don't know. I see some negative consequences from that maybe.
And on a side note, a lot of it sounds big, bad, scary. I understand that. A lot of times, the membership that we have, which is a different Facebook group, and I can talk about that in a bit, but the membership we have is really getting people to review their own accounts and to pull problematic ASINs before Amazon comes calling with a notification. If you notice certain complaints from buyers directly to you, it doesn't have to be feedback. It could be a message. It could be return reasons that are, you see a pattern on your own before Amazon identifies any patterns. We work with people to avoid suspensions because we help them identify problem ASINs and at least troubleshoot why the problems are happening before they decide to delete them or simply take them out of your inventory. Because honestly, that's the best way to do it. Reviewing yourself on a consistent basis and finding the return rates are too high. Return reasons are consistently for not as described or not as advertised. If it's an easy fix, like trying to get the product detail page updated or imaging updated in terms of, like, let's say new packaging versus old packaging, then great. You don't have to necessarily take your inventory and throw it away.
Right.
Delete the listing. I mean, I'm not saying that's what you should do every time. If it involves protecting your account, ultimately, if you have to do that, then I recommend doing it, because that one product shouldn't be the basis of your entire selling relationship with Amazon. But you can institute and execute a lot of these fixes way before Amazon gets you on their radar screen. In fact, they'd actually appreciate it if they find some complaints against a particular ASIN and they look in your account and they see it's no longer listed, right? Then they'll be like, oh, they took action. They realized the returns were high for this product. We asked them for a receipt, and they sent us a receipt, but at the same time, they said they weren't going to sell this listing anymore. And they took the products out of FBA, or they deleted the listing. They're much less likely to suspend you if they see a pattern of behavior like that, which is annotated on your account, not reading your mind, not guessing, but actually correspondence that gets annotated on your account, that indicates you've been reviewing your account all along. You're not just waiting for them to do it.
I think that's some, and I understand that as sellers we're busy. For some of us it's a side hustle. For some of us it's a full-time job. But yeah, I do think that's important and something people should do more often.
Yeah, pay a lot of attention. Put your own eyes on your own account. Don't expect that everything's fine unless Amazon sends you a warning, or people get those soft block messages, right? Like, you can relist this yourself, but there's a high rate of return on this product, or we've received a series of complaints about the product. I mean, those are warning signs where you can really jump in and take action, and prevent anything terrible from happening down the road. That's what our membership's all about. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So we've gone into a lot of stuff, and I want to be respectful of your time. So tell us a little bit about what you do and who you do it for, and what kind of things you offer if people need your services or your help.
Sure. So we have services, which is consulting services, client services that I do. I help people compose plans of action. I help them get into the causes, which is kind of the bedrock of any good plan of action, identifying the root causes of what went wrong to begin with. If you're not sure what they are, I help people identify those before writing up viable solutions, proactive solutions that Amazon will consider acceptable if they want a plan of action from you. They want a concise and direct document that's formatted a certain way. Suspended sellers, I'm pretty well known for getting people reinstated, because I used to work for Seller Performance on the teams that suspended people. So that's kind of how this all started for me 3-4 years ago.
Seems like an ace up the sleeve.
Yeah, I mean, well, and beyond that, I'm most of my clients are actively selling. They're not suspended. We don't work on one-offs with most people. We're actively on their accounts. Either they're part of the membership or they've retained me on a monthly basis. And like I said, in terms of reviewing your account, we're doing two things. We're helping identify problematic products and maybe get them out of your inventory, or figure out what's going wrong with them. Whether you're private label or reseller, I've got clients of both kinds. But whatever's causing that problem, it needs to be nipped in the bud and fixed. Or Amazon will motivate you to fix it their way, which nobody wants. And I'll be the first to tell you, by the way, Seller Performance doesn't respond to emails fast enough. They've got some internal problems in terms of managing the queues. Contacts get lost. Account annotations aren't always done in a complete, thorough, professional way. Things have kind of gone downhill since I've left, and it's not just me. A lot of people left. And we have, what we're dealing with now is, how things are today, which is not ideal, but there's only so much of that we can change. We can change our own behavior. So I'm working with sellers to make sure your game is as tight as possible. You're just looking around that curve and thinking ahead as much as possible, because you don't want to wait for things to happen to you and just react. Being proactive is kind of what Amazon expects. I mean, they're not always proactive themselves, right? But they're them, and they don't have to be, because they're they're holding the cards.
Right.
On our side, we just have to have as many defenses up as possible, as many plans to protect your account as possible. So just one quick example. I mean, when it comes to authenticity, a lot of people reselling or in arbitrage get inauthentic complaints. Hopefully you're doing some wholesaling and you've got maybe a letter from your supplier. but have your documentation ready to go before you're ever accused of, you're not looking for a receipt, which might take a day or two. You're not finding a receipt that's faded or illegible, because Amazon investigators hate the treasure hunt. They hate having to look for, well, they circled this, but they circled the line through it, and I can't tell what the SKU is, or I can't, the date's fuzzy on the receipt. They just throw it away. They don't bother with that stuff anymore. So just make sure you're going through receipts, you're going through invoices ahead of time, and you're looking at them for quality. Make your own quality assessment of your documentation, because in the case of something like inauthentic, this is the first thing they ask you for.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, these are the types of things we're working with people on our membership, which is ecommercechris.com/membership. Easy to find on my website as well, which is ecommercechris.com. And in terms of people writing POAs or submitting things and they're not sure if it's going to be acceptable by Amazon standards, I also have a service where I'll give you some feedback and I'll review your POA before you send it in. So
that's great.
That's pretty easy to book on a slot on my calendar on my website. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And you do have a Facebook group, public?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah. The Amazon Seller First Class, that's the public Facebook group. And then for our membership, we have a private Facebook group that's members only. And the membership's pretty cheap right now, $500 annual fee.
Oh, that's not bad.
And I've got courses in there. How to build a POA, of course, was the first one I came up with. And now we've got account review coursework in there as well.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. And I'm in there a lot answering people's questions, things like that. The private the private group, Facebook group, obviously has fewer members than the public group.
Of course.
But it's a small growing community, but we're paying a lot of attention to it and answering questions quite a bit in there. So
that's great.
If any of your listeners or watchers have any questions about any of those things, I'm available to answer.
Awesome. Yeah, I know that sometimes us Amazon sellers balk at paid groups and things like that, but I think I'm in several. I pay memberships to a lot of paid groups,
right?
Because one, you do get more of a sense of community. You get some more tailored help, and it's usually worth every single penny. So I'm going to keep
it at a low price point to make it affordable let's just say that. Yeah,
exactly.
This is not something that this isn't like a compliance course that we're asking $2,500 for. I mean, this isn't something that's 9 or 10 hours of weekly coursework that you need to go through. Like if you're a certified fraud examiner, you have to go through something like 90 hours of coursework. I'm just saying this because I was a fraud investigator for Amazon, but we keep it affordable for a reason. We want to make sure that this information to educate yourself is available. So
awesome. There are going to be links to everything down below or right above, depending
down there.
Watching this on Facebook or YouTube. Yeah. Chris, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know that you're a busy guy, and I hope that everyone watching got a lot out of this. I know that I did. And make sure you go check out ecommercechris.com. And of course, if you need help with anything, make sure to reach out to Chris. So, thanks again, man.
Happy to help.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.